In the lush green hills of ancient Israel, there lived a young shepherd named Benjamin. He was a humble boy, no more than 14, but his heart was pure, and his love for the Lord was unwavering. Benjamin's days were spent tending to his family's flock, guiding the sheep to fresh pastures, and ensuring their safety from the wild beasts that lurked in the shadows of the mountains. One cool evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, painting the heavens with shades of orange and pink, Benjamin led his sheep to a quiet valley. The grass was soft and green, and the gentle murmur of a nearby stream filled the air with a soothing melody. The sheep, tired from the day's journey, began to settle down, munching lazily on the lush grass. Benjamin sat on a large rock near the stream, his shepherd's staff resting by his side. He looked up at the sky, his thoughts drifting towards the stories his father had told him about the great men of Israel, Abraham, Moses, David, all shepherds, just like him, who had been called by God to do extraordinary things. As he pondered these stories, a soft breeze began to blow through the valley, carrying with it a strange and peaceful feeling. The wind seemed to whisper Benjamin's name, so faintly at first that he thought it was just his imagination. But as the whisper grew louder, more distinct, Benjamin realized it was not the wind at all. "Benjamin!" the voice called, gentle yet powerful.
"Benjamin, my child."
The young shepherd stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked around but saw no one. The sheep remained calm, unaware of the voice that was now calling to him with increasing clarity. Who is it?" Benjamin stammered, his voice trembling.
"Fear not, Benjamin," the voice replied. "I am the Lord your God."
Benjamin fell to his knees, overwhelmed with awe and fear. He had heard stories of God speaking to his people, but never had he imagined that he, a simple shepherd boy, would hear the voice of the Almighty.
"Rise, my son,"
the Lord said, his voice filled with love. "I have chosen you for a special purpose." Benjamin slowly stood up, still trembling. "What can I, a mere boy, do for you, O Lord?" he asked.
"You have been faithful in the little things, my child,"
the Lord replied. "And now I will entrust you with more. There is a great darkness coming upon the land, and I need you to be a light in the midst of it." The young shepherd's heart swelled with both fear and excitement. "What must I do, Lord?" he asked.
"Go to the village of Bethlehem," the Lord commanded. "There you will find a man named Jesse. He has 8 sons, and one of them, David, is the one I have chosen to be king over Israel. You must anoint him as I have instructed."
Benjamin was stunned. "But Lord," he protested, "how can I, a mere shepherd, approach such a man? And how will I know which son is the chosen one?" "Do not fear, Benjamin," the Lord reassured him. "I will be with you. Trust in me, and I will guide your steps." With a heart full of both trepidation and determination, Benjamin set off the next morning, leaving his flock in the care of his younger brother. The journey to Bethlehem was long and tiring, but Benjamin pressed on, driven by the voice of God that had spoken to him. As he approached the gates of Bethlehem, Benjamin felt a wave of doubt wash over him. He was just a boy, after all. How could he possibly fulfill such a monumental task? But as these thoughts swirled in his mind, the Lord's voice echoed in his heart, reminding him of the promise he had made. Benjamin took a deep breath and entered the village. The streets were bustling with people going about their daily lives, but Benjamin felt out of place. He looked around, searching for Jesse's house, but realized he had no idea where to begin. Just then a man approached him. "You look lost, young one," the man said kindly. "Can I help you?" I'm looking for a man named Jesse," Benjamin replied hesitantly. "Do you know where he lives?" The man smiled. "Ah, Jesse is well known here. His house is just up the road, near the old sycamore tree." Benjamin thanked the man and made his way to the house. As he stood before the door, his heart pounded in his chest. What if he wasn't welcomed? What if he failed? But before he could second-guess himself, the door opened and a tall, strong man stood before him. "Can I help you, boy?" the man asked. "Are you Jesse?" Benjamin asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "I am," the man replied, eyeing Benjamin curiously. "What brings you here?" I come with a message from the Lord," Benjamin said, summoning all his courage. Jesse's eyes widened in surprise. A message from the Lord? Come in, boy, come in. Benjamin was ushered into the house where Jesse's 8 sons were gathered. They were strong and handsome, each one appearing more kingly than the last. Benjamin's heart raced as he remembered the Lord's words. You must anoint the one I have chosen. But how would he know which one? He looked at each of the sons, searching for a sign, but found none. He began to doubt himself once more. But then the Lord's voice spoke again, clear and unmistakable. Do not look at their appearance or their height, the Lord said. The Lord does not see as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. Benjamin's eyes fell upon the youngest son, David, who was tending to the sheep outside. He was not as tall or as strong as his brothers, but there was a quiet strength in his eyes, a humility that set him apart. This is the one, the Lord said. Benjamin took a deep breath and approached David. The Lord has chosen you to be king over Israel, he declared, his voice filled with authority that surprised even him. He then took out a small vial of oil that the Lord had provided and poured it over David's head, anointing him as the future king. David looked up at Benjamin, his eyes wide with shock and awe. But I am just a shepherd, he said. How can I be king? The Lord has chosen you, Benjamin replied. And just as he has guided me, he will guide you. From that day on, Benjamin's life was never the same. He returned to his flock, but now with a newfound sense of purpose and a deep, abiding faith in God's plan. He continued to listen for the voice of the Lord, knowing that he had been a part of something far greater than himself. As for David, he grew in wisdom and strength, and in time, he became the greatest king Israel had ever known. And through it all, he never forgot the young shepherd who had come to anoint him, nor the God who had called him from the fields to the throne. And so, the call of the shepherd was answered, and through his obedience, a kingdom was forever changed. Certainly, I'll continue the story from where we left off, expanding on the journey of both Benjamin and David, as well as the impact of their obedience to God's call. Chakr, the shepherd's call. Answering the voice of God, continued. As time passed, Benjamin continued his life as a shepherd, but he was no longer just a boy tending to sheep. The experience of hearing God's voice and fulfilling his command had changed him deeply. He found that he was more attuned to the subtle whispers of the Lord in his heart, guiding him in ways he had never imagined before. David, on the other hand, continued to grow in strength and wisdom. Though he was the youngest and least likely of Jesse's sons, he was soon recognized for his courage and skill. He faced many challenges, but his faith never wavered. Benjamin would often hear tales of David's bravery, how he had defeated wild beasts to protect his flock, and how he had become a favorite in King Saul's court for his skill in playing the harp. Despite the growing admiration for David, there was unrest in Israel. King Saul, once anointed by the prophet Samuel, had turned away from the Lord, and his reign was marked by disobedience and jealousy. The Lord's Spirit had left Saul, and in its place, a tormenting spirit troubled him. Saul became increasingly paranoid and fearful, particularly of David, whose popularity and success only grew with each passing day. One day, Benjamin was tending his sheep in the hills when he heard the distant sound of hoofbeats. He looked up to see a group of riders approaching. At their head was a man clad in royal garments, his face drawn with worry. "Are you Benjamin, the shepherd?" the man asked as he dismounted. "I am," Benjamin replied, recognizing the man as one of King Saul's servants. "How can I help you?" "The king requests your presence," the servant said. "There is a matter of great importance that requires your counsel." Benjamin was taken aback. He was just a shepherd. Why would the king seek his advice? But then he remembered the voice of the Lord and how it had guided him before. Without hesitation, he agreed to go. As they rode to the palace, Benjamin could feel a sense of foreboding. The palace was grand, but there was a heaviness in the air, as if the very walls were burdened by the king's troubles. When they arrived, Benjamin was led to a large chamber where King Saul sat on his throne, his eyes shadowed with fear and suspicion. "You are the shepherd who anointed David, are you not?" Saul asked, his voice trembling slightly. "I am, my lord," Benjamin replied, bowing respectfully. "Do you know what your actions have done?" Saul demanded, his voice rising. "You have set a boy against a king. The people speak of David as if he were already their ruler, and I am left to watch my kingdom slip away." Benjamin's heart ached for the king, but he knew that God's plan was greater than any man's. "My lord, it is not I who chose David, but the Lord himself," Benjamin said gently. "God has a plan for Israel, and we must trust in his wisdom." Saul's eyes narrowed. "And what of my kingdom? What of my legacy? Am I to be cast aside like a broken vessel?" Benjamin paused, choosing his words carefully. "The Lord sees what we cannot, my king. He knows the hearts of men, and he chooses those who will lead his people with righteousness and justice. But his love and mercy are for all who seek him, even those who have strayed." Saul was silent for a moment, his face a mask of inner turmoil. Finally he spoke, his voice low and heavy with sorrow. "I have lost the favor of the Lord, and it is my own doing. But what am I to do now?" Benjamin stepped forward, his heart filled with compassion. "Seek the Lord, my king. Humble yourself before him, and he will hear your cry. It is never too late to turn back to God." Saul looked at Benjamin, a flicker of hope in his eyes, but it was quickly overshadowed by doubt and fear. "Leave me," he said abruptly, turning away. Benjamin bowed and left the chamber, his heart heavy with the weight of the king's despair. As he made his way back to his home, he prayed for Saul, asking the Lord to soften the king's heart and guide him back to the path of righteousness. Meanwhile, David continued to serve in Saul's court, playing his harp to soothe the king's troubled spirit. But as Saul's jealousy grew, so did his fear of David. The king saw in David a threat to his throne, and his paranoia turned deadly. He plotted to kill David, but each time the Lord protected David, guiding him to safety. One night, as David fled from Saul's wrath, he found himself in the very valley where Benjamin had first heard the voice of the Lord. Exhausted and alone, David knelt by the stream, the same stream where Benjamin had once prayed. "Lord, why does the king seek my life?" David cried out, his voice filled with anguish. "I have done nothing but serve him faithfully, yet he pursues me as if I were his enemy. What is your will for me, O God?" As David prayed, the gentle breeze began to blow through the valley, just as it had that fateful evening when Benjamin was called. The voice of the Lord spoke once again, this time to David. "Fear not, David," the Lord said. "I am with you. You are my chosen servant, and I will protect you from harm. Trust in me, and I will lead you to the throne of Israel." David felt a deep peace wash over him, and his fear melted away. He knew that the Lord was with him, guiding his steps just as he had promised. David rose, strengthened by the Lord's assurance, and continued on his journey, determined to fulfill the destiny that God had laid out for him. As the years passed, Saul's reign grew more tumultuous. His fear of David consumed him, driving him to greater acts of madness. Despite this, David never lifted his hand against Saul, even when he had the opportunity to do so. He respected the anointing that Saul had once received and trusted that God's timing was perfect. Eventually, Saul's time came to an end. In a fierce battle against the Philistines, Saul and his sons were slain. The news of Saul's death reached David, who mourned deeply for the king and his beloved friend Jonathan, Saul's son. With Saul's passing, the path was clear for David to ascend to the throne. The elders of Israel came to him, and in a solemn ceremony, they anointed him as king. David remembered the day when Benjamin had poured oil on his head, marking him as God's chosen one. He knew that his journey had only just begun, and that the road ahead would be filled with challenges. Under David's rule, Israel prospered. He was a king who sought the Lord in all things, leading his people with wisdom and justice. The Lord blessed David, and his kingdom grew strong. But David never forgot the lessons he had learned as a shepherd, tending his father's flock. He knew that true leadership was about serving others and trusting in God's guidance. As for Benjamin, he continued to live a quiet life as a shepherd, content in the knowledge that he had played a part in God's great plan. He watched from afar as David's reign brought peace and prosperity to Israel, and his heart swelled with pride and gratitude. In the years that followed, Benjamin became known as a wise and faithful man, one who had heard the voice of God and answered his call. His story was told and retold, becoming a source of inspiration for generations to come. Through his obedience and faith, Benjamin had helped to shape the future of a nation, proving that even the smallest of us can be called to do great things in the service of the Lord. And so, the shepherd who once tended his flock in the quiet hills of Israel became a legend, a testament to the power of faith and the importance of answering the call of God, no matter how daunting it may seem. This continuation adds further depth to both Benjamin and David's journeys, showing how their obedience to God's call had lasting impacts on themselves and the entire nation of Israel.